Narrative writing is a style of writing that lets a writer tell a story. It usually involves a main character, and the events that happen to this character are called the plot. The plot has three main parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. The beginning of the story introduces the main character and sets up the situation. It gives readers some background information, like where the story takes place and what the main character wants or needs. The middle is where the action really happens. This part is the most important because it shows the main event, which is the turning point of the story. It's the part where things change for the main character and the main problem or challenge is faced. Finally, the end wraps up the story. It shows how the main character deals with the problem and what happens afterward. The end often gives readers a sense of closure, where they find out how the story finishes.
I know all that, Teacher Val, but how do I teach it in a way my students will understand? There are many ways to do it. Let me show you how I would approach it for A2 level students.
Start with a writing task. In my case, it's write about the day you had a fever. First things first, introduce key vocabulary related to fever and symptoms. Ask your students these two questions. How often do you get a fever? And how do you feel when you have a fever? Next, introduce the structure of a simple narrative using a personal story. Read it together with your students.
Val's fever. Last week, I had a fever and I felt very sick. I had a bad cough and a runny nose. I couldn't go to school because I was too tired and weak. My parents were worried and took care of me at home. On Friday, I missed school and went to see a doctor. The doctor gave me some medicine for my fever. I had to stay in bed all day because I was too tired to move. My mom took care of me. She made me some hot soup and told me I got sick because the weather changed. She made sure I drank a lot of water to get better. On Sunday, I felt much better. I could get out of bed and play again. I felt strong and happy. I hope I never get sick again.
Now, ask 2 or 3 questions to check for understanding. Here are some examples. What happened to Val last week? What did the doctor give Val? How did Val feel on Sunday? Now, I'll show you a series of tasks to help your students understand the sentence structure in the narrative. Let's start with task 1. How did you feel when you were sick? Display the picture of a person with a fever. Ask your students to complete the sentences using the words in the box. This exercise helps your students use the vocabulary in context and form the correct sentence structure. Task 2. Students must circle the things they should do when they have a fever. You can use a handout or turn it into a game. Divide the class into 2 teams. A student from each team runs to the board and writes the correct sentence. Whoever finishes first and does it correctly gets a point for their team. Don't forget they need to change the verbs to the past tense. In the next task, students practice writing sentence structures in the past tense. Ask your students to look at the example and write sentences in the same way. In task 4, students practice verb conjugation in the past tense. Ask them to look at the example and write sentences in the same way. In the next writing task, ask your students to correct the mistakes and rewrite the sentences. I hope you've noticed that all my sentence structures mimic the structures in the example story. So students are repeatedly exposed to them and practice them all the time. Now, tell your students that they need to write a short story about when they were sick. But before they can do that, they need to organize their writing, and you will help them do it. First, they need to come up with a title for their story, such as terrible headache, or a bad fever, or how I was sick, and so on. It's really up to them. Then they need to organize their story into 3 parts: beginning, middle, and end. The beginning of the story answers 2 questions. What happened and what were your symptoms? The middle answers these 2 questions. What did you do and what did your parents do? The end finishes the story by answering, how did you feel after? Finally, ask your students to complete the writing task using the structure they have learned. Ask them to use the sentence prompts and make sure they include all 3 parts. Want to see what they came up with? Me too. Let's take a look.
A terrible headache. Last week I had a terrible headache and I felt very sick. I had a fever and a sore throat. On Friday I missed school and went to see a doctor. The doctor gave me some medicine. I stayed in bed all day because my head hurt so much that I couldn't move. My mom stayed by my side. She made me my favorite food and told me to get more sleep. On Sunday, I felt much better. The headache was gone and I felt like Superman. I hope I never get sick again.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. I wish you all great students and smooth classes. Happy teaching, and I'll see you in my next video.